So, let me paint the picture for you. I'm a 29-year-old woman, let's call me Emma, and my husband, Alex, is 31. We've been together for a while, and when we got married, I had the same expectations everyone does: peace, love, and maybe a bit of financial stability to boot. But let me tell you, my expectations were about to be shattered. When we got married, I was introduced to his family, and I gotta admit, I didn't think much of it. I mean, sure, everyone has their quirks, right? But his family? His family took quirks to a whole new level. It started out small, his mom, Karen, always asking for help with random things here and there. She's one of those people who can't do anything without someone holding her hand, and I, being the good daughter-in-law, stepped in. I didn't mind at first. Then came his dad, Greg, who, let's just say, wasn't exactly living up to the whole father figure thing. I'd get calls from him, too, asking if I could lend a hand with this or that, always with some kind of sob story attached. It wasn't long before I realized these favors weren't just casual asks, they were expectations. Unspoken, but they're all the same. At first, I did what anyone would do. I helped out. I thought, they're family. They're struggling. They'd always say things like, "Oh, we'll pay you back, don't worry." And sure, I believed them. I wanted to believe them. But that was before I realized that paying me back was never really on the table. The first big hit came when they asked me to cover a small loan for them. A couple of $1,000. Now, I'm no millionaire, but I thought, okay, maybe they really are in a bind. I pulled the money out of our savings. Alex and I agreed that this would just be a temporary thing, that they'd pay me back in a few months. No big deal, right? But here's where things get dicey. Months go by, no repayment. No updates. No, "Hey, we've got something for you." The silence was deafening. I started asking Alex about it, but he just shrugged it off. "Don't worry about it. They'll pay you back eventually." It was his family, after all, and he didn't want to rock the boat. But I wasn't about to just let it slide anymore. I had helped out when they needed me, and now they were leaving me hanging. The tension built, and when I tried to talk to them directly, they started to avoid me. Oh, and when I mentioned the money, it was like I'd asked them for the moon. Karen would change the subject, Greg would make some offhand joke to brush it off, and I felt like I was going crazy. This wasn't how a family should treat each other, right? Then, the bombshell came. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, I overheard Karen and Greg talking about a new plan to fix their financial mess. As soon as I walked in, they stopped. My heart was racing, something didn't feel right. I sat down, trying to act casual, but I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. They turned to me and dropped the bombshell. They were asking me, no, telling me, that I needed to take on even more of their debt. More than I had already helped with. The amount was almost comical in how much it was. It was as if they thought I was some sort of walking ATM. My brain short-circuited, and for a split second, I just stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. But I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I felt paralyzed. I looked at Alex for some support, but his eyes were down, his hands twitching, like he knew where this was going but didn't want to step in. That was it. I was on my own in this one. I pushed back. Hard. I told them, no. Absolutely not. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to ask for more when they hadn't even repaid the original debt. And Alex? He just sat there, like a spectator, not offering a single word of defense. That's when it hit me, this was the tipping point. His family's expectations weren't just some small burden anymore. They were suffocating me. But they didn't stop there. No, they tried every angle. They guilt-tripped me, played the victim, made me feel like I was the one betraying the family. I felt cornered, trapped. And in the midst of it all, Alex stayed silent. That's when I made my decision. I packed up and left. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let them control me, let them drag me down with their endless demands. I left. And let me tell you, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. But what I didn't expect, what no one expected, including me, they're begging me to come back now. Begging. They've messaged, called, and even sent a few desperate texts to Alex. They're playing the long game, trying to win me over with their apologies, their pleas, their promises of change. But here's the thing, I'm still on the fence. I'm torn, to say the least. And right now, I'm trying to figure out if I should go back and forgive them, or if this is the end of the road. I'll admit, I was beyond tempted to go back. Who wouldn't be, right? It's family, after all. And at the end of the day, no matter how angry or hurt you are, there's always that little voice in the back of your head saying, maybe things will get better this time. Maybe this is just a rough patch. So yeah, when they started begging, part of me felt that pull to reconcile, to just wave away all the tension and move forward like nothing happened. But then the reality hit. And that's when I started questioning everything. It all began when they sent a message to Alex. Not me. Of course not. They knew they had to go through him if they wanted to get to me. It was a carefully crafted apology. You could feel the desperation in each word. They promised that they were sorry, that they didn't realize how much pressure they were putting on me, and that this time would be different. They even threw in some emotional manipulation, just to make it sting a little harder. We just don't want to lose you, Emma. We've always treated you like family. You've been such a blessing in our lives. We can't believe you just leave us like this. That last sentence? Yeah, it stung. I couldn't help but feel a mix of guilt and anger simmering underneath the surface. And then there was Alex. Oh man, that was the hardest part. He was torn, he always is. He kept telling me that they were sorry, that they were going to get their act together, and that I should just forgive them. Like it was that easy. Like forgiveness could erase everything that had happened. And the guilt. The guilt was suffocating. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to go back to the way things were, where I could just focus on my marriage and our future, instead of constantly dealing with the mess his family had created. But every time I thought about going back, I couldn't ignore how alone I had felt in the whole situation. Where was Alex while I was being pressured to take on the debt? Why wasn't he standing up for me when I had to deal with Karen and Greg's manipulative tactics? So, I said it. I said the words I didn't want to say. I told him, you need to decide, Alex. Are you with me or are you with them? The moment the words left my mouth, I could see the color drain from his face. It was like he hadn't fully understood what I was saying until that moment. But here's the thing, as much as I needed Alex to take my side, I couldn't ignore the cold, hard truth. His family had been treating me like a bank, like a safety net. They had used me, and every apology felt like an attempt to reel me back in so they could continue with the same old routine. I was exhausted. The weight of carrying not just my own financial responsibilities, but also theirs. It had crushed me. And when I realized that Alex wasn't going to take a firm stand, that's when the floodgates opened. I began to think about all the times he'd faltered, all the moments when he'd let me down, choosing his family over me without even realizing it. I wasn't sure anymore if I could trust him to prioritize us over them. It was that moment, the realization that I couldn't count on Alex the way I thought I could, that broke something inside me. And it was a turning point. It made me ask myself, why should I keep fighting for someone who wouldn't fight for me? And yet, the thought of leaving him? That felt impossible. We had so much history. Our life together, the memories, the love we'd shared, it all kept circling in my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't escape. But at the same time, that heavy weight, that burden of being the fixer, the one who had to sacrifice for the sake of his family, was eating away at me. So, I did what anyone would do when they're caught in a loop of confusion. I put some distance between us. Not physically, but emotionally. I pulled back. I started thinking long and hard about what I needed, what I wanted, without the pressure of being the perfect daughter-in-law, without the guilt that came with every phone call, every text, every manipulation. But what about his family? They were relentless. They didn't stop. They showed up at our house unannounced, knocked on our door at odd hours, sent letters with heartfelt apologies. And here's the kicker, they didn't just stop at begging. No, they took it a step further. They started threatening. Greg, Alex's dad, had the audacity to call me. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but underneath it was something darker. Something I didn't expect. He said, "If you don't come back, Emma, you're going to tear this family apart. You're going to ruin everything. Is that really what you want?" And for a moment, I thought I might lose my mind. What kind of person says that? What kind of person tries to guilt-trip someone into financial slavery for the sake of their own mess? It was the ultimate test. The ultimatum. The challenge. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my boundaries. My self-respect. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. If I went back to them, if I caved into the pressure, I would be giving up the most important thing I had left, my own peace of mind. And yet, Alex was still sitting there, torn between me and them. He wanted to keep the peace. But the question lingered in the air, could he really keep the peace at the cost of losing me? The days following Greg's phone call felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't escape the weight of his words, his tone, the almost threatening undertone that lingered in every sentence. It was like my heart was being twisted in a vice, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, his voice echoed in my mind. "You're going to tear this family apart." Was that what they thought of me? That I was the villain in their story, just because I'd said no? I had tried to help, tried to be understanding, and this is how they repay me? With guilt, manipulation, and now, threats? It felt like I was suffocating. Alex, on the other hand, seemed like a broken man. He was torn. And I could see it. He wanted to keep me, wanted to bring everything back to the way it was, but he was so damn afraid of confronting his family. It was like he was caught in this tug-of-war between me and them. Every conversation with him felt like we were speaking different languages. I'd ask him, "Why aren't you standing up for me?" And his answer would be something like, "I don't want to make things worse with them. They're struggling." I could see the conflict in his eyes. But the longer I let it go on, the more frustrated I became. I needed him to make a choice. To step up and fight for us, for me. But every time I brought it up, he'd retreat further into his shell, telling me to be patient, that things would work out. I was losing patience, though. Patience was a luxury I no longer had. One night, when I couldn't take the tension anymore, I stormed out. I needed space. I needed to think. The streets felt empty under the streetlights as I walked aimlessly, trying to clear my head. But everywhere I looked, I felt like I was drowning in memories of what we were supposed to be. It was like my whole world was starting to crack, and I couldn't hold it together anymore. When I came back home later that night, Alex was waiting for me. He looked small, defeated. But this time, when he spoke, something was different. "I talked to my mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She cried. She's sorry. She promised they'll get their act together." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Of course she did. My tone was sharp, cutting. But that's the problem, Alex. They've promised before. How many times have they promised to pay me back? How many times have they said they'd change? And where are we now? I know, but I don't want to lose you over this. Please, Emma. Don't make me choose. He was pleading now, and it crushed me. But the truth was, I was already making a choice. And the weight of that realization made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't fair. I didn't want to be the bad guy. But I also wasn't willing to sacrifice my happiness, my sanity, for people who couldn't even show the bare minimum respect for me. The next morning, Karen and Greg showed up uninvited. They always had a way of making their presence known, too many phone calls, too many texts, and now, here they were, knocking on the door like they owned the place. Alex opened the door, and I could hear their voices before I even saw them. I just don't understand why she's doing this, Karen was saying. She's been such a huge part of this family, and now she's shutting us out? I could hear the tears in her voice, and part of me felt that familiar pull. The part that still wanted to believe in their sincerity. But I couldn't let myself go down that road again. Not after everything. I couldn't go back to being their easy fix, their cash cow, their emotional punching bag. I stepped into the room and held up a hand. Stop. Please. They all turned toward me. Alex's face was a mixture of guilt and hope, like he was praying I'd cave. Karen and Greg both had this look of surprise, like they didn't expect me to stand my ground. I've been thinking, I said, my voice steady, but cold. I've been thinking a lot. And I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the one who fixes everything, who cleans up your messes. I'm not your safety net, and I'm not a bank. Karen's eyes went wide, and Greg's jaw tightened. Emma, please, Karen began, her voice soft. We're your family. We need you. No, I said, cutting her off. You need me to clean up your mistakes. You need me to carry your debt. But that's not family, Karen. That's using me. And I'm done. Greg stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought he was going to get physical. He didn't, but the anger in his eyes was palpable. You think this is easy for us? You think we're just asking for charity? We're family, Emma. Don't turn your back on us. Family doesn't do this, I said, my voice growing louder now. Family doesn't put each other in debt and then act like nothing happened. Family doesn't pressure each other into paying off their mistakes. And then it happened. Karen broke down. She sobbed, clinging to Alex like he was her lifeline, whispering, We're so sorry, Alex. We didn't mean for it to go this far. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I can't fix this for you, I said, my voice shaking now. And I can't fix your relationship with me either. Not unless you both change. The room went silent, and for a long moment, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had made the wrong choice. But deep down, I knew that this was the right thing for me. For my peace of mind. For my future. And when I looked at Alex, his face still torn between me and them, I felt like I had just pulled myself out of the deepest hole. But the question still lingered, the one I wasn't ready to answer yet. Could we fix us? I wish I could tell you that things settled after that moment, that everything suddenly clicked into place, and I found some kind of peace. But that's not what happened. In fact, it only got more complicated from there. After I made my stand, the weight of it all hit me. I'd drawn a line in the sand, and now, there was no turning back. Karen and Greg left that day, but their departure didn't bring relief, it just left me with 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. I hadn't been expecting to feel so unsure. I had taken a stand, sure, but what did that mean for me in the long run? The silence in the house that night was deafening. Alex didn't speak to me for hours. He didn't shout or yell, he just stayed quiet. I could see the hurt in his eyes. He didn't understand why I couldn't just let it go. Why couldn't I just forgive them? The family was in pain, and I was the one who had closed the door on them. But I couldn't budge. And I think, deep down, Alex knew that. The question had never been whether or not they were sorry, it was whether or not I could keep living with the fact that they only came to me when they needed something. The apologies, the promises, the tears, they didn't mean a damn thing anymore because they never followed through. By the time Alex came to me later that night, I was a mess. Not on the outside, but inside. I was torn between wanting to stay strong and wanting to go back to him, to fix everything, to make things easier. "Emma," he said, standing in the doorway. "I know I've messed up. I should have stood by you. I shouldn't have let them treat you like that. I was wrong. But I need you to understand, they're family. They need us. They need me." His voice cracked. That was the moment I realized how broken he was over this whole situation. He was stuck between two worlds, one that was pulling him in with promises of reconciliation, and the other that had pushed him to see just how badly he'd let me down. I looked at him for a long time. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. I wanted to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Not when I felt so betrayed. Not when the last few weeks had been spent questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about his family, and about the future. "Alex, I don't want to fight anymore," I said finally, my voice shaky. "But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the one who sacrifices. I can't keep giving, and getting nothing in return. They've used me, Alex. And you've let them." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "Please, Emma. Don't say that. I'm begging you. I'll make things right. I'll fix this." But as soon as he said that, I saw it. The hesitation in his eyes, the fear that maybe, just maybe, his family wasn't going to change. And that was when it all clicked for me. He was afraid. Afraid to let go of his family, afraid to stand up to them because he didn't want to lose the only thing he thought was constant. He didn't realize that by not standing up to them, by letting them keep treating me like this, he was risking losing me. I took a deep breath. "You can't fix this, Alex. Not like this." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. For a moment, I thought he was going to break down right there in front of me. But instead, he stood frozen, as though he were trying to process everything I had just said. The next few days were a blur of awkward silences, strained conversations, and moments of pure emotional exhaustion. But then, a few days later, everything came to a head. It was a Sunday, and we had been ignoring each other all morning. I had spent the better part of the day going through old photos, trying to keep myself distracted. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it, knocking on the door. And not just a polite tap. No. It was aggressive, like someone was trying to break it down. I stood up, my heart pounding. Alex wasn't home, he had gone out to clear his head, and now, here they were. His family. Again. I knew what was coming before I even opened the door. And there they were. Karen and Greg, standing at the doorstep, their faces drawn and tired. Karen had her typical desperate look on, while Greg's face was pinched, like he hadn't slept in days. But this time, there was something else in their eyes. Something different. "Emma," Karen started, her voice shaky, like she was trying to hold it together. We're sorry. We've been wrong. We've made mistakes, and we know we've hurt you. But please, don't walk away from us." Greg nodded in agreement, his usual arrogance now gone. "We've been selfish. We need your help, but we don't want to ask for it like this anymore. We want to make things right. We need you to come back. Please." I felt a rush of emotions. Relief. Anger. Confusion. These people who had used me for months, maybe even years, were standing at my door begging me to forgive them. But this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about boundaries. About knowing that I couldn't continue to let myself be used, no matter how much they begged. I stood there for a long moment, looking at them. And then, as if everything in my body was telling me to do it, I closed the door. I didn't want to hear their pleas anymore. I didn't want to be the person who was always expected to fix everyone else's mess. And when I turned around, I realized something. The hardest thing wasn't walking away from them, it was realizing that I didn't need to walk back into a cycle of chaos. The days after that moment, when I closed the door on Karen and Greg, felt like a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was more like the calm before a storm. I had finally drawn the line, finally said enough, but I wasn't sure if that meant I'd feel better or worse. In the weeks that followed, I kept replaying the whole situation in my mind. I had finally chosen to stand up for myself, to stop letting Alex's family walk all over me. But that didn't mean it was easy. There were moments when I questioned myself. Was I being too harsh? Was there any chance that it would actually change? But the truth was, I couldn't keep waiting for change that wasn't coming. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace for people who saw me as a convenience. I kept my distance from them. No calls. No messages. Nothing. The silence was heavy, but I realized something. It was the first time in a long time I had been able to breathe without the weight of their expectations hanging over me. It felt freeing. But that didn't mean I was free of the emotional fallout. Every time I saw Alex, I couldn't help but wonder if I just lost him for good. And that's when the conversations with Alex got real. It took weeks for us to talk openly about what had happened. I wasn't sure if we'd ever get past the pain of it all, but slowly, we began to open up. "I've been thinking about everything," he said one night, his voice low. "I get it now. I see how much they hurt you. I see how much I hurt you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hear those words and just let everything slide back to the way it was before. But the reality was, I couldn't just forget. The trust had been fractured. The balance had been tipped too far. "You can't just say sorry and expect everything to go back to normal, Alex," I told him. "You can't just tell me you get it now, after everything. It doesn't work like that." He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I know. I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't expect you to just forgive them. I want to fix this. I want us to be okay again." There was something raw in his voice, something that made me hesitate. Part of me wanted to hold on to the memory of who we used to be, but another part of me knew that I couldn't go back to the person I had been before. I couldn't be the woman who let her boundaries be trampled, who let her worth be defined by others. I had learned something about myself during this whole ordeal, and that was worth more than any apology. Over the next few weeks, we started to rebuild. Slowly, tentatively, like two people learning to trust each other again. Alex stepped up, not just with his family, but with me. He started to stand by my side more. He began to understand that protecting me from his family wasn't about picking sides. It was about respecting me as an individual, not just as his wife. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it wasn't even close. But there was a shift. A quiet, subtle shift where I could see that things were finally starting to change. And then, a few months later, I got a message from Karen. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't another apology. It was a simple text. "We've been working on our issues. We know you're hurt, but we're trying." For a second, I felt that old wave of guilt rising up. Maybe I should respond. Maybe I should just give in and move on from all the pain. But then I remembered how far I'd come, how much I'd fought to get my own life back on track. And so, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. What mattered was that I had taken control of my life, that I was no longer at the mercy of anyone's expectations. I still think about them sometimes. I still wonder if things could have gone differently. But I know one thing for sure now: I don't owe anyone anything. Not when they've shown me who they are. I owe it to myself to choose peace over pressure, to choose my own happiness over the demands of people who don't understand boundaries. Alex and I are still working through things. We've had some hard conversations, but we're still together. And while things might not be perfect, we're in a better place. A real place where I'm not afraid to say no, to stand up for myself, to make sure my voice is heard. And as for Karen and Greg, I don't know what the future holds for them. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they won't. But that's no longer my burden to carry. I've learned that I can't fix anyone else. And that, my friends, is a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.